Hello and welcome. This is our pre-session for the Kempe conference for 2024, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I am here to guide you through a discussion that may set you up for success at our upcoming conference. We've done these pre-sessions for the last couple of years and have found them to be quite informative and successful. And so just wanted to do that again for this year's conference. So my name is Colleen Gibley-Reed. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the Kempe Center. I'm a faculty instructor, and I specifically work on the Colorado Child Welfare Training System project. And I'm so excited that you are here today, whether it's your first conference or a return conference. So to start off with, I just want to share my passion in terms of why I'm in the driver's seat for today's session. And this is a quote that means a lot to me. It's from David Tulin, who was quoted in Frances Kendall's book, Understanding White Privilege. And David says, we must learn to become comfortable with the uncomfortable and uncomfortable with the too comfortable. And that is a quote that has almost been kind of my words to live by, or my quote to live by, over the last 10, 15 plus years that I've gotten myself more involved in understanding my social justice journey and understanding my privileged identities and working to disrupt those privileged identities. And I think it's a quote that really is in alignment with the conference. And so really encourage you to think about how you can take this quote into your heart and bring it along with you to the conference this year. So to start off with, I just want to set the stage for our conversation today by first doing a land acknowledgement. So land acknowledgements are a really great way for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land and that the land that we work on, we live on, we recreate on is stolen. And so it's a sign of respect to Indigenous communities to do land acknowledgements. And we don't want to stop there. There's other things that we can do in the spirit of allyship and advocacy to Indigenous folks. So I just want to start out with the land acknowledgement to respectfully acknowledge that I'm located in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that's the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute nations and peoples. Fort Collins, Colorado is also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native tribes, and I want to recognize that. And lastly, I also want to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. And so I do encourage you to do some research to find out whose land you occupy. I also want to do a labor acknowledgement. This is something that I've learned more recently. In the same way, I also want to acknowledge that our country, specifically here in the United States, was built with stolen labor and the generational wealth which was created by the hands and on the backs of enslaved Africans. And it has been kept from them while enriching others. And so consider if that applies to where you land and where you live today. So I just want to start off with those two acknowledgements. As we have this conversation today, I just want to encourage you to kind of open up yourselves to agree to kind of follow these different community agreements. They're a really great set of community agreements that I actually kind of appreciatively borrow from Corey Best and his colleagues related to a session that was done back in 2000 on the manifestation of white supremacy and child welfare. And so these are some of the community agreements that were used in that session, and I found them to be very useful related to conversations that can be challenging. So as you are having the conversation today, in this pre-session and as you go forth through the conference, I encourage you to essentially just be open to having messy conversations about some of the topics that are going to be held. So the community agreements that we would encourage you to consider are choosing authenticity over comfort, embracing messiness and kindness, practicing personal and group accountability, being aware of equity of voice, listening with the same passion with which you want to be heard, and honoring subjectivity versus objectivity, and accepting non-closure. Many of these are real favorites of mine because I think they can really lend to us showing up in a way where we want to learn and grow. And I would encourage you to consider these today and moving forward into the conference this fall. For my own personal accountability, I'm going to get into that here shortly as we have some conversations related to becoming comfortable with challenging topics. So for myself, I identify as a white, straight, cisgender, able-bodied, middle-class woman who lives in the United States. I'm educated. I have English as my first language, and so I hold a lot of privileged identities. And as I mentioned earlier, I try every day to think about ways that I can disrupt those privileged identities. And so I just want to acknowledge that as I do this session as a way to practice my own personal accountability, because that is the lens in which I live my life, and it is the lens in which I facilitate this session today. So let's get into some conversation about becoming comfortable with challenging topics. And again, I refer you back to David Tulin's quote that I started with a little bit earlier. So the intent behind this pre-session is really wanting to meet people where they are, no matter what their intersecting identities are, and no matter where you are on your journey to understanding power, privilege, and oppression. So this might be your very first day on that journey. You may be a little bit further along on the journey. It's hard to say where each individual person is, but this conference and this pre-session is intended to meet people where they are and to decide for ourselves kind of how we want to push ourselves further to move further along in that journey. So I encourage you to think about that as we're going into this session. I also want us to hold space for the concept of both and as it relates to this conference. If it's the first time that you're coming to the conference, or even if you're coming back, this conference can really push us in terms of thinking about concepts that maybe we haven't thought about before, or maybe it's going to push us to challenge our ways of thinking in the way that we've done our jobs for the past years or even decades. And for myself, I know that this conference, the first time that I attended back in 2020, really pushed me to the edge of my comfort zone, specific to some of the thoughts and feelings I had about working in child welfare. I've been in this field for 30 years now, and so I've really had to come to terms with some of the choices I've had to make as it relates to how I've done my practice. And so as we go through this session and as you go through the conference, I encourage you to think about how we can have space for both and, meaning that we can hold space that we are doing good work for families and we work in an oppressive system. And so how can we make space for that to try to think about how can I serve families today in a way that is anti-oppressive while also working to push against the status quo of a very oppressive system in child welfare or in healthcare or education or whatever your background may be in. So we want to acknowledge that some of the conference sessions or even the titles may challenge you, and that's okay. So have a list of them here. For example, accountability is prevention, accountability is justice. We also have the Upend podcast, a crash course in family policing and abolition. We also have one called Breaking Down Bias, the Gift of Intersectionality. So some of these terms may even be new to you and may challenge you. And what we ask for you to do is to come to the conference with an open heart and open mind. So as you're going through the conference, if you're in a session and you're feeling really challenged by the topics or even the speakers, we have some suggestions for you. Number one is to notice and welcome your discomfort. Noticing that is a part of our own growth and transformation. And I love this second bullet point, replace judgment with wonder. So if you feel judgment coming up within yourself, I encourage you to get curious about that. Reflect on questions like, why am I feeling this way? Or am I pulling away, resisting, or shutting down? Or what can I do instead? Next, consider the benefits of growth and transformation, even if it's feeling really hard in the moment. Demonstrate compassion and empathy for other folks in the room who may be representing oppressed communities, and return to this pre-session if you need a refresher on getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. So that's something that I would just suggest, and our conference committee would suggest that you do if you notice those feelings coming up within yourself. And then as you're in different sessions, if you notice those feelings coming up in other folks who are struggling, we would also invite you to demonstrate compassion and compassionate accountability to others in the session, considering how you may help them along on their journey and reach out in the chat box and maybe send them a private chat and invite them into a personal conversation, either during the session or following the session, because it may be that you're further along in your journey and maybe they could use some help and support along the way. But ultimately, we really want you to just approach the Kempe conference from this place of acknowledging that when we push ourselves to the edge of our comfort zone, that's where the true transformation happens, kind of getting into that brave space for learning. I love this quote by Rick West, who says, "Your comfort zone is a beautiful thing, but you'll never grow there." So I just encourage you to take that forward. We're now going to move into a video to introduce you to a concept that may be coming up in the Kempe conference related to oppression and the different types of oppression that are present. It's called The Four Eyes of Oppression, and it's a beautiful video that really helps understand the different types of oppression, in a pretty easy way to understand, in my opinion. So here we go.
Oppression. It's a word that's often used as a blanket term, but there's actually a whole lot more to it. There are four interlocking aspects of oppression: ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And it might seem like a small difference, but it's very important to be able to distinguish between each kind, because understanding oppression is the first step to fighting it. Let's start with the core at the heart of every form of oppression: ideology. Every system of oppression comes from the idea that one group is somehow better than another. Ideological oppression starts when the dominant group associates positive qualities with itself and negative qualities with the marginalized or othered group. Ideological oppression describes the deeply ingrained social root of inequality. It's the larger overarching idea that leads to the isms. For example, the idea that black people are dangerous is ideological racism. The idea that poor people are lazy is ideological classism. Ideological oppression leads to institutional oppression. Institutional oppression is the way that systems and institutions manifest the dominant ideology. Institutions control access. Who is able to get to what and how? This includes legal rights, police practice, access to medical care and education, public policy, political power, and media representation. For example, when women make 2/3 of what men make, that's institutional sexism. When a building is constructed without wheelchair ramps, that's institutional ableism. All of this leads to interpersonal oppression. Interpersonal oppression is probably the easiest to recognize because it happens all around us. Interpersonal oppression is the way that people play out discrimination and violence on each other. It can take the form of microaggressions, jokes, stereotypes, and harassment. For example, when a student is bullied for being gay, it's interpersonal homophobia. When a Muslim person is told that they're a terrorist, it's interpersonal Islamophobia. And all those forces, ideological, institutional, and interpersonal, lead to internalized oppression. Internalized oppression is the way that people with marginalized identities internalize narratives of their own inferiority. It's what leads people to feel less than. This is the end goal of oppression. The oppressive party doesn't need to exert force any longer because the marginalized group is enacting oppression on itself to maintain the status quo. It's important to remember that it's never a marginalized person's fault that they feel internalized oppression. It's simply what happens when someone faces negative stereotypes, low expectations, and ongoing discrimination. So, for example, an immigrant feeling embarrassed about having an accent is internalized xenophobia. When a trans woman feels that they can never be a real woman, that's internalized transphobia. So, to review, the four eyes of oppression are ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. Each of these types are interconnected and completely supported by the others. They can never exist on their own and can even be seen as a cycle. Now that you understand the different kinds of oppression, you're even more equipped to fight it. Don't forget that any effort to dismantle oppression should aim to address it at all four of these levels. Thanks for watching.
All right. So I think that video really puts a very complex concept into an easy way to absorb the content. And so feel free to come back to this video if you need to listen to it again. It's literally one of my favorite videos to really explain a really tough concept in a easy to absorb or easy to digest way. So be thinking about the 4 eyes of oppression as you go to the conference this year and how you are seeing oppression kind of connected to the different topics that are discussed in the different sessions. I also want to have a conversation today about the concept of privilege. So at the beginning, I introduced myself and shared the different privileged identities that I have. And for some, the concept of privilege can get people feeling a little prickly. And some people aren't even a fan of the term privilege. So another word you could say is advantages. But I love this this quote that I've recently heard of, which is privilege is the magic carpet that allows you to sail over the worries of others without ever having to look down. And so we're going to watch a video here in a minute called What is Privilege? And as you watch the video, I encourage you to think about your different intersecting identities and what concepts may apply to your particular situation. Because I think it's really important that people who hold advantages or privileges really know this concept so that they can work to use their privilege for good. So let's see what this next video has to say.
Privilege is the unearned advantage we get from being part of a dominant group whose needs have traditionally been prioritized. We can experience privilege because of our gender, race, sexual orientation, ability, class, or other identities. Many of us experience a combination of privilege and disadvantages. For example, white women have privilege because of their race, but are at a disadvantage because of their gender. The privileges we have or don't have can have a big impact on our experiences at work. For example, people without disabilities can usually assume that the software their company uses will work for them. But people with disabilities often have to ask whether a tool is accessible, and if it isn't, they have to ask for an alternative. Or consider religious holidays. Employees who observe a dominant religion's holidays, like Christmas, can generally expect paid time off on those days. But employees who belong to more traditionally marginalized religious communities, such as Muslims, may have to use their vacation days to participate in holiday traditions. It's important to remember that privilege isn't something we earn or choose. Privilege is structural. It exists because our society as a whole prioritizes some groups over others. But while we can't control whether we have privilege, we can become more aware of it. That awareness is crucial. If we don't understand that privilege makes it easier for some people to succeed, we might think the more successful group is just working harder.
Here's an example. In corporate America, for every 100 men who are hired into manager-level positions, only 72 women are hired. This isn't because men are more qualified. Instead, it's largely because men benefit from unearned advantages in the hiring process. One study showed that replacing a woman's name with a man's name on the exact same resume increased the odds of being hired by more than 60%. Similar biases affect people of color, LGBTQ people, and people with other traditionally marginalized identities. In another study, replacing a stereotypically black-sounding name with a stereotypically white-sounding name on a candidate's resume resulted in 50% more callbacks, the equivalent of adding 8 years of work experience. And in the third study, when a candidate had something on their resume that suggested they were LGBTQ, such as belonging to an advocacy group, they received fewer callbacks. Remember, in all these studies, the candidates had the exact same qualifications. Privilege, not effort or ability, gave one group an advantage over another.
These examples show why it's so important to understand how privilege shapes our experiences. When we see why women, people of color, and others with traditionally marginalized identities are underrepresented, we can start to address some of the barriers that hold these groups back. But acknowledging our privilege can be really, really tough. It's uncomfortable to admit that we have an advantage we didn't necessarily earn, especially when we've still had to work hard. But when we do start to see the reality of our own privilege, we can also better understand the experiences of people with less privilege. And we can start to find ways to use our privilege to support and advocate for others. In other words, we can become allies.
So I hope you enjoyed that video as well. I think it makes some really great points, and I'm hoping you're starting to kind of connect the dots, thinking about how privilege connects back to ideological oppression that was shown in that previous video. And that example about the resumes was really interesting to me when I first heard about it. And I actually want to share a book called I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown. Austin Channing Brown is an African-American woman who shares in her book that when she was born, her parents actually intentionally wanted to give her a name that sounded more white and more male in order to kind of get her to the interview process once she became an adult. And so as a white woman, I had never thought about, having to do that had I had children, that is a kind of strategy that a Black family would need to take in order to support their daughter from the time she was born until the time that she was an adult and beyond. So be thinking about your privileged identities and how those show up for you additionally as you go through the conference. Next, I want to share an image that I kind of connected to, kind of had these ideas as I was learning my privileged identities. And I started thinking about the process of when you go through grief and loss. You tend to go through different kind of stages of grief, if you will. There's this framework by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I kind of created this as it relates to understanding your privileged identities. That I think at first, if you have privilege, you tend to kind of go through this period of denial. Like, what are you talking about? I have, privilege. Like, I'm a white person and I grew up poor. And so you can't say that I have privilege as a white poor person. Well, that kind of negates the point that, white is race. That's one identity. And then if you are living in poverty, that's a second identity as it relates to class. And so oftentimes we want to just deny that we have our privilege. We may even go through a period of then having a lot of anger and frustration about this concept in and of itself, related to, as the video inferred, about having to come to terms that you have advantages that you just have as a result of how you were born, instead of things that you've done to actually, earn things, which you can work hard and you can still have privilege. Talk about that both and concept that I referred to at the beginning. And then I think we go through a period of bargaining where we say, like, I didn't ask for this privilege or these advantages, like, take them from me, but we can't really do that. And then we can then go into a period of feeling really depressed and overwhelmed and sad. And you may have heard of the term like white tears or white guilt or something to that effect. I think that kind of comes out specifically for white people kind of during this depression stage, if you will. But we do at some point have to really work through whatever our privileged identity is. We have to work through that denial, that anger, that depression, the bargaining, in order to find out, how can I use my privilege for good in order to be an ally or an advocate to people from historically marginalized groups. And so if you are having a hard time acknowledging your privilege or just coming to terms with your privilege, it's okay to have those feelings, but it's also important, who do you process those feelings with? So for example, as a white person, it would not be appropriate for me to go talk about all the feelings I have that are not great feelings as a result, for example, white guilt or whatnot. It would not be fair for me or appropriate for me to go have that conversation with a person of color to work through all my feelings related to the fact that I have privilege. But it would be okay to go talk with another white person about that. So I just want to normalize those are the feelings as we have our journey to understand our privilege. It's quite normal to kind of go through these feelings, whether you're understanding your whiteness or, having class privilege or U.S. citizenship privilege or able-bodied privilege or any other privileged identities. It's okay to have those feelings, but it's how you deal with them that matters the most. So we're going to look at one more video, which I think does a really great job of helping us to understand privilege. So here we go on that last video. This one's a little bit longer.
Jabari, are you okay?
Honestly, no. My house burned down 2 weeks ago, and it's been a nightmare ever since.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. I'm so sorry.
No need to apologize. I just need help. I can't rebuild it, especially by myself.
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt the conversation, but I'm here too. I also don't have a house right now either.
Wait, what, did your house burn down as well?
Yeah, is everything okay?
Yeah, no, everything's fine. It's not on fire, that's for sure. We're renovating. We're tearing the carpet out for wood floors.
Oh, so your house is fine?
It felt like we were talking about his house only. It just didn't feel fair. I mean, there are plenty of other houses in the city, right? Mine included.
Right, but we weren't really just talking about houses, we were talking about his house that burned down.
And it's not just my house.
What do you mean?
I don't know if my family is unlucky or what, but my father's house and his father's house, they all burned down. And my family's been in that neighborhood for over 400 years, and it seems like our houses keep burning down.
So move, right? I mean, that seems like the simplest solution, yeah?
We can't just move. It's not that easy. All right? My family has been in that neighborhood for over 400 years. And we don't have the necessary resources to rebuild. And on top of that, it's like anytime someone asks if there's anything that they can do, it always ends up shifting the conversation to something else. And I'm just tired of it.
I mean, I don't see how that can be true, right? I mean, how hard is it to leave your neighborhood? Where do you live?
The South Side.
Right. I never really go down there. I hear it's pretty bad.
Jabari, I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. And I want to help, I do, and I feel like I don't really know how to help, and you seem like such a genuinely awesome person, and this sounds stupid and unfair to say, but is there any way that you could help me understand how to be an ally or help me know what I can do?
I appreciate that. In order for you to help, first off, you need... Of course.
Are you okay?
Does it look like I'm okay? By the looks of it, I'm the one that got the worst chair.
So why did you sit in it?
I didn't choose this chair. All right, we sat in the chairs with our names on it.
Oh, glad I got this one then.
James, that's insensitive. Jabari, I'm so sorry. When we walked in, I noticed that some of the legs on your chair looked a little unstable, but I didn't know if I should mention it.
You did? Wait, I wish you would have said something.
So do I. I think I was afraid of saying the wrong thing because you're already kind of frustrated, and I didn't want to become part of the problem.
Okay, well, the problem is you not saying anything at all because it makes me feel like you didn't care because you could have stopped me from falling.
You're right. I shouldn't have been silent. I'm sorry. James, where do you live?
Upper East Side of the city.
That's where the big contractor business is.
Yeah, the owner of that company is a pretty good friend of mine.
Maybe you could ask him if he could help by sending people and supplies to rebuild Jabari's house and the other houses in the neighborhood that have burned down.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, why not?
Well, because then there'd be fewer resources for my neighborhood. I mean, what happens if my house needs a repair, then they can't do it because we gave all the supplies to him.
Wait. I've seen your neighborhood, and there is nowhere near the amount of damage that has been done to mine and my neighbors' houses. Plus, there is plenty of supplies to go around.
Hey, look, man, I'm sure you will figure it out, okay? I mean, can we just change the subject here? Stop talking about burning houses and broken chairs. There are plenty of other worthwhile things in the world to be talking about.
There are a lot of things to talk about, but my house burned down. All right, and it seems like no matter who I ask for help, no one does anything. Not you, not the house insurance people, no one. It seems like all the people that have the resources that can help, they're too self-absorbed and hesitant to share with anybody because they think they're gonna lose something. And I'm tired of it.
What What are you doing?
I can't take this anymore. If he can't sit in the same comfort that we can, then I don't want to sit down. And neither should you. Yeah, I'm gonna stand with Jabari.
Go ahead. I'm comfortable where I am.
Look, Jabari, I can't even begin to understand the pain and the discomfort that you and your neighborhood have had to endure. I've driven by the South Side many times on my way to work, and I've seen the terrible destruction that you and your neighborhood have had to go through. And I hate to say it, but I've ignored it because I could. It didn't affect me personally. But not anymore. Where do we start?
You can start by educating yourself, learning about how and why my neighborhood keeps burning. All right, it's not just about you acknowledging that my neighborhood is in trouble. All right, the damage is so deep, we can't rebuild by ourselves. We need to get rid of the old foundation and lay a new one.
I don't know anything about building houses, but I want to learn.
It's not gonna be easy.
That's okay. Are you coming with us?
You have access to a lot of resources. We could use your help.
What do you say?
This week, I saw this really important post on Instagram. It was a picture of a young black girl holding a poster. And this is what the poster said. We said Black Lives Matter. We never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter, but we need your help with Black Lives Matter because Black lives are in danger. How incredible will this world be if we serve and support each other like family to get through the challenges that we're all seeing in the world right now. And when we start to conquer and work through challenges, we can then together unite and align to solve the next one. I hope that you'll share this video. Thank you so much for watching.
So take a breath if you need to. I know that that is a really intense video, but I really appreciate it because I think it can give us an idea of how we can use our privilege for good to help support others. And so be thinking about what you can take from that video and the other videos as well from today into the conference. So we're doing this as a pre-session of the conference, but we also just want you to invite about after the conference, what are the things that you can do to continue to stay engaged? So one, read more about the concepts of oppression and privilege in order to expand your understanding. If you need to do some education of yourself beyond the conference, we would encourage you to do that either before or after. Listen to people who experience oppression. I think that was shown in the previous video. I think that if we listen more and talk less, that can be a really great opportunity to hear the experiences of people who have been marginalized or oppressed in society and may have different experiences than what we've had. Learn about how you can work in solidarity with oppressed groups where you are listening to what they want to do in terms of moving forward instead of going in and telling people what to do. It's, joining in and figuring out how you can be a support instead of a leader in those efforts. Joining activist communities, in order to support those you have privilege over, focusing on teaching other people about their privilege, like paying it forward. And again, just acknowledging that your privilege exists. So again, that's just some content that we want you to consider as you're moving forward into the conference, specifically about your identities, and how they shape the experiences that you have in this world. And to also take some time to reflect on maybe some things that you just need to be in, quiet reflection about before going into the conference in order to prepare you for some of the courageous conversations that you'll see at the conference. So lastly, I just want to cover some ways to navigate the conference and meaningful sessions to attend. So encourage you to become really familiar with the conference agenda through the conference hub prior to coming to the conference, looking at the different titles and descriptions and speakers and seeing which particular sessions are going to land for you. And you'll have access to all of the different workshops once you register for the conference. So we hope that you will do that if you haven't already. Also want to let you know that we have a variety of learning formats for the conference this year, just like we have in previous years. We'll have 8 keynote speakers, 125 plus interactive workshops, over 30 lecture halls, over 12 international exchanges, over 10 media circles, 12 What's on the Library Shelf sessions. That's one of my favorites, getting to meet with authors who have some really great books and publications that have come out recently or are on their way out. Different facilitated discussion groups, construction zones, action circles, and then our podcast community. So be thinking about the different learning formats and what you're most interested in joining this year in terms of all the different offerings. As you can see, there are many available. And lastly, I just want to share our different conference themes for the conference this year. So we have family well-being, child and youth well-being, social, racial, and family justice, focusing on prevention and health, building and sustaining a healthy workforce. Oops, that went a little bit faster than I wanted. Building and sustaining a healthy workforce, sorry about that. And truth-telling, economic equality, community well-being, transformative systems, child, youth, parent, and family rights and advocacy, tech-facilitated child abuse, and lastly, interagency and community partnership approaches. So again, sorry that conference themes slide forwarded before we wanted it to. So there's a lot of different themes to help you to also plan your adventure, choosing your own adventure at the conference this year. And I'll be excited to see you there. I'll be at the conference this year as well. And we'll be sharing this PowerPoint, which also includes the references in case you want to pay forward any of the different videos that we watched in today's session, or if you want to learn more about any of the content that I shared today. So again, thanks for being here today. And I encourage you to now kind of debrief your thoughts and feelings after watching this video with the conference committee who will be inviting you to share now. So make it a great conference, and I will see you there. Thank you so much.